Hi guys, welcome to another episode of Pointing on Sharp. Today we're taking a look at the Finnish M62 bayonet. In my opinion, this is probably one of the coolest bayonets ever made. Now, it was made to fit the RK62 and later the RK71 and 76, as well as pretty much all of the other variations of those rifles. Now, the bayonets themselves are made by Fiskars and Hackman. And from what I can tell, 350,000 or even more of the rifles were made. I don't know how many of the bayonets were made, probably less, because a number of the rifles are probably for the civilian market or export versions or things like that wouldn't come with bayonets, but a great deal were made, so up to 350,000 I probably assume. And they were produced from 1965 all the way through until 1994. Now, these bayonets are really scarce today and they command quite a premium. They're very, very expensive, unfortunately, because, well, I don't know, they were just never surplused, I guess, but when they do pop up, they sell very, very quick because they're just absolutely fantastic. Now, jumping into the history, in the 1950s, the Finnish were looking at replacing their in-service rifles, and they were looking at the AK, or the automatic Kalashnikov. And they were initially looking at the Soviets and their version, but later they moved their sights to Poland, and they started making their own copy of the Polish version of the AK. I think it was in 1958 they had their first couple of prototypes. 1960 they had their first version, the RK60, which is essentially what the RK62 would end up as, minus a couple of bits and pieces. And then in 62 they came up with the rifle they really, really liked. Now, the bayonet itself was actually based on what the Czechs were doing, and the Czechs had their VZ58 bayonet. I've already done a video on this one here. Fantastic little bayonet, great little throwing knife too. And when you put them side by side, you really see the similarities in that very similar length blade, handle, no muzzle rings, and they both have a mounting rail on the top of the handle. As you can see, this one is significantly longer. It runs the full length, while this is reasonably short. Another similarity, they both have a press button on the left-hand side. So here it's on the cross guard, and here it's a little bit further back. But they operate pretty much the same. This one here, you depress your button from left to right, and it drops that lug there. This one is a little bit different. You depress your button and it pushes this circular piece here, which is actually your locking lug, across and out of the way. And it actually has a circular locking lug on the muzzle device. So the RK62 has a flash hider, a tri-piece flash hider, and on the bottommost piece we have our bayonet lug, and that's where the bayonet engages the full length of the handle. You press the button aside and it locks into that little semicircle recess there, and it mounts quite firmly. There were a lot of different versions of the M62 bayonet, so generally there's 3 different patterns, and what we have here is the third. So the very first pattern was produced from 1962 until 1965, and how you spot those ones is they weren't parkerized. So pretty much all of these bayonets have a parkerized finish, but the very first ones were blued. They also had, you see the clip-pointed tip here? That was a little bit shorter on the first pattern, and they had a false edge which ran pretty much the length of the blade, but was not sharpened. And they were completely unmarked, whether this one says Fiskars, the manufacturer, just down here. Now, the second pattern was very similar, had a parkerized finish, so no longer blued. The clip-pointed tip was longer, so the same length as what we have here and what all later models would be. And it was also unmarked, and they were produced from 65 until the early 70s. I'm not entirely certain when. And that brings us to the third pattern, which was the same as the second. The bayonet was the same, pretty much, except we have our markings, either Hackman or Fiskars, and the Fiskars can be either small or large. I'll put some photos up so you can see the difference between the smaller and the large print, or the narrow and the broad print as it's called. And that's pretty much the main difference. Other than that, there's a couple of other versions. I wouldn't really call them versions. They're the same bayonet, but they come with different scabbards. So the exports come with a smooth scabbard that doesn't have all of these rivets down here. And there was an M76 reservist version. I'm not certain if those were actually issued to reservists, but they were certainly sold with the reservist rifles, or labelled as such. And they similarly come with a different scabbard. So it's a brown leather, again missing a whole bunch of rivets. These bayonets are very scarce to come across at all. So finding either of those two variations of scabbards is quite cool. I'd love to get the reservist one. I think they look quite sick. Now we'll jump into the actual bayonet itself. It was actually inspired by a Finnish puukko knife. I think that's how it's pronounced. And essentially that's like a traditional Finnish like fishing knife, field knife. It really reminds me of like a filleting knife or a fishing knife. It's very much like a traditional American fishing knife. But these were sharpened in factory, and they've got a reputation for being the sharpest bayonet ever made. And I would absolutely believe it. I wouldn't want to be mucking around with this too much because I'd probably cut myself. Then looking at the blade, it's black parkerized. So usually parkerized finishes that I've come across have been like a dark grey or like a gunmetal grey or something like this. This is black and it sparkles a tiny little bit. The camera really doesn't do it justice, but it's a very, very nice finish. Now, the blade and tang are machined as one piece, and then a black plastic handle, I think it was a nylon handle, I can't really remember, is put in place with 3 brass rivets. And that's really all there is to the construction of the bayonet. There's really not too much to say. From what I can tell, they all have the same number of ribs in the handle. I don't think there's any variation there. But very, very well made. My only complaint with it, it doesn't have any kind of cross guard at all. So I'd be really, really nervous about having your hand slide down the blade and slicing your fingers open if you're stabbing a person or a target or anything, if you're using it as a knife and not as a bayonet. Now, I actually had the luxury of shooting an RK62 last week, and I shot it with the bayonet fixed. The rifle shot pretty well. It was actually the one of the civilian versions in 223 Remington, not to be confused with the 556 NATO versions. And I couldn't help myself. I was shooting paper targets, and I went up and gave the target a slash with the bayonet at the end. I didn't take a photo, I should have, but it sliced about horizontally halfway through the paper before the paper started to tear. So it was incredibly, incredibly sharp. And just the frontal thrusts, like I've mucked around with bayonets, stabbing paper targets before, and usually you bend the paper, you tear the paper. This just created like really, really fine slits, cuts so fine you couldn't even see them until you pull the paper apart. So it was really, really nasty. I think that's just about everything with construction. So the scabbard's made of leather with a bunch of rivets through it. It's moulded, it's a bit firm, really, really nice. I like it. I've heard that it's reindeer leather, but I can't confirm that. That could just be, a furphy. But yeah, we'll jump into the markings. There are none except the manufacturer, really. And that's only on the third type, third models, which seem to be the most prevalent. The first 2 types you don't come across terribly often, but these bayonets in general you just don't come across very often, and when you do, it's quite special. I really, really like them a lot, and this is probably shot to the top of the list of my favourite bayonets. Like I always had a soft spot for them, but since I've got this one, of my Cold War bayonets, it's definitely my favourite, and overall it's, don't make me choose between my children, it's definitely the top 2 or 3. Anyway, guys, that's all the information I've got for you today. If I've missed anything or made any mistakes, please feel free to comment below. Let the rest of us learn from whatever knowledge you've got. And thanks for watching.